I woke up and made matcha. I woke up and I went to make matcha. But when I went to open my matcha, it was empty. With an empty stomach and empty spirits, I decided to take my life into my own hands. I got up, I hopped in the car, and I barreled down the highway towards the grocery store with motivation behind my eyes. I walked in, there was jasmine, green tea, but there was still no matcha. Stomach in a frenzy, I asked the worker Chantel, where is the matcha? And she proceeded to point me to the good green stuff that I had been searching for. I picked one up. It was nutty, creamy, chocolatey. I made my way to the cashier with my mouth watering. I handed her $5.25, keep the change, I said. Then I drove home with thoughts of infinite energy on my mind, but when I walked through the door, I went to make it and I realized that I had no spoon. What a cruel world we live in. But somehow I remembered Isaac Newton's law of gravity and a thought appeared in my mind. What if I just pour it? Maybe some things in life are meant to be enjoyed without being civilized. I took the first sip and as caffeine ran through my veins, I was finally satisfied. First off, I want to just apologize for that story. Second, storytelling is one of the most powerful skills that you will ever learn. And in this video, I'm going to break down storytelling into simple and easy to understand terms for you so that you can not only just grow your YouTube channel, but make better videos, become a more interesting person, and leave a lasting impact on people on and offline. So how do we tell good stories? Well, it's actually quite simple. You see, storytelling isn't some woo-woo concept like how most people talk about it. In fact, it's really just all formulas. And there are really 8 popular storytelling formulas: the hero's journey, 3-act story structure, the Fitchian Curve, Freytag's pyramid, the 5-act structure, Dan Harmon's story circle, the 7-point structure, and Save the Cat. And each of them has a very specific way that they're used that once you learn, you can essentially just copy and paste, not just to get more views, but to make videos that actually leave the viewer feeling something. And this is so valuable because people decide to become a die-hard fan when they emotionally resonate with you. Now, there are really 5 main elements to any story, and these apply across all 7 of the major story structures. The first is exposition, or the beginning. And this is essentially where you show the backstory, the characters, the settings, and the plot, and you introduce the main character or the theme of your video. For example, the opening pages of the Hunger Games introduce Katniss, Panem, and the games. Then you have the rising action. This is really where your story starts to kick off and things start to get moving. Usually there's some sort of inciting incident that throws our character into the action. This brings what we call tension into the story, and tension is the feeling of suspense that keeps us glued to the screen. For example, this is Katniss volunteering for her sister, followed by the battles in the arena. The rising action goes on for majority of our story until we build into the climax. And the climax is really the key point in our story that everything has been leading to, where our character either succeeds or fails at their largest challenge yet. So for example, Katniss wins the Hunger Games and takes down the government. Then we go into what's called the falling action, where the consequences of the climax play out. So for example, Katniss returns home and tries now to live a normal life. Then we move to the resolution, where we essentially tie up any loose ends into the story and show how the main character and their world has changed. So for example, showing Katniss's life years later. You want to think of this like a wave. The sea starts off calm, and then a wave starts to form. It gets bigger and bigger until it crashes and then runs up on the beach, until it calmly recedes back to the ocean. Now, all stories have 5 elements, but we can mix and match how we build up to them and what other parts we actually add into it to fit certain stories better than others. So for example, if we want to tell a story that gets straight into the action, we use what's called the Fitchian Curve. But if we want to tell a more transformative story that leaves more of an emotional impact, then we'll use something like the hero's journey, which is where we're actually going to start today. First is the hero's journey. The hero's journey is the classic story structure that old epic tales have told throughout history, and it's still used today in movies like How to Train Your Dragon and Star Wars. It has 12 elements to it, and it's separated into 3 acts. The first is the ordinary world, where we see the hero's normal life before the story begins, which essentially establishes who they are, what they want, and what's missing from their life. So for example, Hiccup lives on Berk, a Viking village at war with dragons. But as a scrawny blacksmith's apprentice, he's an outcast who can't fight or kill dragons like everybody expects. Then you have your call to adventure. Something disrupts the ordinary world. That's a problem or a challenge that puts the hero out of their comfort zone. For example, Hiccup shoots down a Night Fury with his invention during a raid. Now, that's the one dragon no Viking has ever managed to hit, which brings us to number 3, refusal of the call. The hero essentially hesitates or resists. He's held back by fear, doubt, or obligation. When he finds the downed dragon in the woods, Hiccup raises his knife to kill it, as tradition demands, but he can't bring himself to do it. And then 4, he meets the mentor. So the hero encounters a guide or experience that gives them the knowledge or confidence to move forward. So for example, Toothless himself becomes an unlikely mentor. Hiccup studies and befriends him, and then learns firsthand how dragons actually behave. This leads to them crossing the first threshold. The hero essentially commits to the journey, then enters the unknown, with no way of going back to the ordinary world. So Hiccup starts sneaking into the forest to secretly care for Toothless, and he starts stepping outside of everything that Berk has taught him. Which brings us to Act 2, the initiation. And the initiation is really the main part of the story. It's where all the action actually happens. So we have tests, allies, enemies, where the hero faces challenges, they make allies, and then meet the opposition, where they learn the new rules of this world. So for example, Hiccup enters dragon training class, where he uses what he's been secretly learning through Toothless to subdue dragons through understanding instead of violence. He gains Astrid as an ally and eventual confidant, while he stays at odds with his father's expectations. That brings us to approaching the innermost cave. And again, we're in the rising action here. So the hero prepares to face their greatest fear or challenge, and this is really the big buildup before the climax happens. So Hiccup builds Toothless a prosthetic tail fin where they can go ahead and fly together. And their bond deepens as they get closer, and he finds the truth about dragons and the threat behind their raid. Which brings us to the ordeal, which is the darkest moment. This is a major crisis or a near-death experience, or the biggest obstacle yet. Astrid discovers Toothless and the truth about Hiccup's dark secret, which forces him to reveal everything and prove that dragons aren't the mindless enemy that Burke believes them to be. This brings us to the reward, where having survived the ordeal, the hero claims their reward, which is a skill, insight, or transformation. Hiccup wins over Astrid, and the village begins to see dragons differently. But his dad discovers Toothless too, and feeling betrayed, has him captured to lead an attack on the dragon's nest. Which brings us to Act 3, The Return, which shows that the characters have changed. So for one, we have the road back. The hero begins the journey home, but the world may still be pulling them back and testing them one final time. So Stoic's expedition to the nest goes disastrously wrong when they encounter the massive Red Death. And Hiccup realizes he has to go back and fix what his secrecy set in motion. Which brings us to the final test, where the hero must prove that they've truly changed by applying everything they've learned in one last high-stakes moment. So Hiccup and Toothless lead the final battle against the Red Death, working together as a true team. Hiccup nearly dies in the fight, and Toothless saves him, cementing their bond and his transformation. And the next piece of the story is returning with the elixir, where the hero returns home transformed. He brings back wisdom or a gift that benefits others. Hiccup returns to Burke changed, physically and mentally. He's missing a part of his leg, and he shifted the entire village's relationship with dragons from war to coexistence. And now Toothless is a permanent part of his world. His dad finally accepts the dragons, and everyone changes. Here's how I did this with my story. So in the ordinary world, I said I woke up and I went to go make matcha. Then I have my call to adventure, but when I opened the matcha cabinet, it was empty. Then I have my refusal to the call, with an empty stomach and empty spirits. Then I meet the mentor. I asked the worker Chantel, where is the matcha? She proceeded to point me to the good green stuff I had been searching for. Then I crossed the first threshold. I decided to take life in my own hands. I got up, hopped in the car, and barreled down the highway towards the grocery store. Then we have our tests, allies, and enemies. Jasmine, green tea, but no matcha. Stomach in a frenzy. Then we approach the innermost cave. I picked one up, nutty, creamy, chocolatey. I made my way to the cashier with my mouth watering. Then we have the ordeal. When I walked in the door and went to make it, I realized I had no spoon. What a cruel world. Then we go into the reward. But somehow I remembered Isaac Newton's law of gravity, and a thought appeared in my mind. Just pour it. But then we have the road back. I handed her $5.25, keep the change I said, and I drove home with thoughts of infinite energy in my mind. Then we have resurrection. Maybe sometimes life is meant to be enjoyed without being civilized. That's the lesson that we learned. From there, we return with the elixir. I took my first sip, and as the caffeine ran through my veins, I was satisfied. So the hero's journey is extremely useful for creators because it essentially shows you overcoming an obstacle and changing your perspective. So we can use this in challenge videos, educational videos, or vlogs to create a lot more engagement in our viewers. The next type of story structure is called the 3-act structure, and this is one of the most commonly used ones here. It's very simple, powerful, and will keep viewers watching until the end of your videos. And it's called the 3-act structure because, well, it has 3 acts. Act 1 is the setup, which includes the exposition and the inciting incident that we talked about earlier. And this is where the main character commits to the story. Then we run into Act 2, which is the confrontation. This is where the tension rises to our climax. Then we have Act 3, which is our resolution, where the character beats the climax and comes back changed. While this initially sounds similar, it's much different than the hero's journey. And to understand why, we have to look at Jurassic Park. So Jurassic Park opens on a hook where they are on a big ship with heavily guarded shipping containers. Nobody knows what's inside, they simply just know it's a big animal. And then suddenly a worker gets killed. This is the first element of the 3-act story structure. You essentially need to hook the viewer into your story, just like as you would on a YouTube video. From there, we move into the inciting incident, where Hammond dramatically invites Alan and Ellie to spend the weekend on his island. This is the one action that creates the entire story. But where it differs heavily from the hero's journey is after the inciting incident, where we move into the first plot point. So the first plot point here is Alan and Ellie enter the park, and then they see large dinosaurs for the first time. In this moment, it completely changes their perspective for good. This sets up the stage to understand, what kind of world they're actually living in now. They've been dropped into a brand new world with a bunch of dinosaurs. So now we have to move into what's called a pinch point. The first pinch point, a tour is cut short by an incoming tropical storm, foreshadowing the coming catastrophe and separating Alan from Ellie. A pinch point is essentially just a low point in the story where something starts to go wrong. And this builds quiet tension and gives you that gut feeling that makes you say, yeah, something is about to go wrong here, which keeps you invested in watching. And that brings us to the midpoint. The T-Rex escapes, shifting the characters from reactive exploration into active survival mode. And that forces Alan to start taking care of the kids despite his dislike of children. This is really where the story kicks off. Action is happening everywhere, but we can't just stay action, action, action all the time. To make it interesting, we need to move move into our second pinch point. The second pinch point here is where Dennis dies while trying to escape, where he cuts off any hope of restarting the park system and raising the stakes for everyone else. Tension here is at an all-time high as the characters try to fight to survive, which brings us to the third plot point. This is where Ellie turns the power back on, which is a false victory that immediately executes Timmy and puts her face to face with the Raptors, which are the story's true villain. And she narrowly escapes, but then she finds herself in the climax, the most dangerous situation she's ever been in. This is the climax. The battle with the Raptors ends when a T-Rex kills them. This battle is the highlight, and as soon as it's over, we drop back down to the resolution. Alan and Ellie save the kids, and Alan tells Hammond he will not endorse the park, which completes his arc from disliking children to protecting them. And this is the perfect ending as they fly off the island, returning home back to normality. So the 3-act structure can be used for most stories and YouTube videos, and it's the one that I use to plan every single video that you watch on this channel, especially if you run educational content. This is the best one by far. But the next one I recently started using more and more, and it's actually starting to perform better than the 3-act structure on my channel. And I used it on this video right here to get over 185,000 views. It's called the Fitchian Curve, but 99% of creators have never heard of it, but it's actually one of the most powerful story structures on this list. It starts with having little to no exposition, where the story opens in rising action through a series of crises. Then the climax resolves the central conflict, which leads us into the falling action, which shows how the main character has changed. You can think of this as a story that just goes bang, 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 right in your face. It never slows down, and this is really good for YouTube retention because it's fast and it doesn't give the viewer time to click away. But to understand it, we have to look at the movie The Martian. The movie starts in the rising action. We never see the main character Watney at home. We simply see him immediately after the crew evacuates during a dust storm where he's impaled by an antenna and then left for dead. Then we instantly move into the first crisis. He starts to ration out food, figures out how to breathe, communicate, and then stay alive alone on Mars. This leaves the viewer with absolutely no time to breathe until we get to Crisis 2, where he realizes he needs long-term food. He grows potatoes in the lab where he uses Martian soil mixed with his own waste as compost, which then leads us to Crisis 3, the airlock explosion. A breach on Sol 119 tears the airlock loose and kills his crops, which leads us right into Crisis 4, which is the trek to Ares 4. He modifies a rover with a solar cell and extra batteries for a 3,235-kilometer drive to the next mission's landing site. And after recovering the old Pathfinder probe, drive to the next mission's landing site. He does this to reestablish connection with NASA. So you can see that each crisis directly creates the next one. So he has food solved, then it's destroyed, then contact lost, then regained, then survival secured, then a new journey required. And this essentially goes on until each crisis slowly builds up and sets the story up for the climax, which is the rescue. So the Hermes crew improvises a rescue, they fire the ship's thrusters and blow a hole in the front airlock with a makeshift bomb to slow the ship down. Watney punctures his own glove to use the escaping air as thrust, propelling himself towards Beck, who grabs onto him with a tethered maneuvering unit. And this shows that he's no longer solving problems alone from the ground. It's really the single biggest point of no return, which the entire rising action built towards. Once the climax completes, we move into the falling action, where Watney is pulled aboard Hermes and the crew heads home, which closes the story very fast. You just get a short reflection from Watney on being rescued, and then we show him back in his normal world on Earth training future astronauts. We use this story structure on very action-packed videos or listicle videos where you're going through points very, very fast. You just do a one-line intro, point, one-line outro, which moves us on to Freytag's pyramid, and this is one that we use when we want to show a lesson. It's mainly used for a big rise and then a big fall. This one can be used for a lot of cautionary tales or tragedies or anything else that ends in catastrophe. It simply starts with an exposition with an early inciting incident. Then it goes to the rising action for most of the story and escalates the stakes. After that, we go into the falling action where the consequences unfold, and then the resolution where we see a tragic low or comedic triumph take place. So to look at what this looks like in action, let's take a look at the movie Scarface. So in the exposition, we have Tony Montana, where he arrives in Miami as a Cuban refugee with absolutely nothing. He works a low-level job at a food stand and starts doing small jobs for a local drug dealer to prove himself. Then Tony impresses Frank Lopez and moves up higher in the drug trade. He builds power and wealth and then takes over Frank's operation, where he kills him. He gets married and expands his empire with Bolivian supplier Sosa, which moves us right into the climax, where Tony is at peak power and paranoia. He says hello, where his excess, his isolation, his self-destructive instincts have already set his collapse in motion. This leads us into the falling action, where Tony's empire crumbles fast. Sosa cuts him off, his marriage disintegrates, his best friend Manny is killed by Tony himself in a jealous rage, and his sister Gina turns on him before dying in the same shootout that ends the film. Then we end off with the denouncement, where Tony is gunned down in his own mansion, face down in his pool beneath the world is yours globe. This is a real and final downfall with no ambiguity or soft landing. And this one is really just the best for showing hard lessons. If you want to spend more time on the actual downfall and the lesson that you're trying to teach someone, then this is a very, very powerful story structure. This brings us to the 5-act structure, which is very similar to the 3-act structure, but we want to essentially give the story more room to breathe. Now, this one isn't used quite as much, so I'm going to go through it really quick. First, we have the exposition, where we have the status quo and the premise. Then we have the rising action, where you have a series of challenges. Then you have the climax, the point of no return. Then the falling action where you have the fallout. Then the resolution is catastrophe where there's a victory, a loss, and a new world shown. And the main reason you'd use this story structure is to basically make a longer 1 to 2 hour YouTube video. And you want to show the main character having a very strong, slow transformation. But the next story structure that we're going over is used much more often. And it's by one of the most famous directors of all time named Dan Harmon, guy behind Rick and Morty. And if you're a creator, you need to understand this one because it is the fastest way to show a full transformation taking place, which makes it perfect for YouTube videos. It's called the story circle, and it has 8 sections. The zone of comfort, the want or need, the unfamiliar situation, adapt, find, pay a heavy price, return to the status quo, and change. So in Rick and Morty, Morty starts off by existing in comfort. Then he discovers Rick is an arms dealer selling weapons to killers, creating an unethical situation that he wants to undo. He crosses the threshold by taking Rick's car keys to search for a way to undo the damage. But then he accidentally kills the assassin, but ends up saving Fart in the process, where he succeeds in saving Fart's life. But he learns that saving Fart's life will cost all the lives of all carbon-based beings. So he crosses the return threshold, getting Fart to his portal. The change that he experienced is that Morty decides to become someone willing to kill. He came out the other side a changed man, and if you want to show any clear transformation, this is one of the fastest ways to do it. Now I'm actively working on a few videos that use this structure, and I would 100% recommend you try it out. Which brings us to the 7-point story structure. This one is useful for longer form or more serialized content where you need to plan for multiple tension points across multiple episodes. So if you have any series on YouTube, like for example Ryan Trahan's Penny Challenge, then this is the one you should follow because it allows you to plan across multiple episodes and keep the viewers coming back for more. And it's structured like this. You first have your hook, which draws the reader in. Then you have your plot point 1, or the inciting incident. Then pinch point 1, where the protagonist meets the antagonist. Then your midpoint, where the protagonist turns active. Then pinch point 2, the antagonist wins, the protagonist is defeated. Then plot point 2, the protagonist regains drive. Then you have the resolution where the conflict is resolved and the arc is completed. The best example of this is Breaking Bad, where Walter White starts off as a brilliant but underpaid high school chemistry teacher, turns 50 with nothing to show for his talent, and he's quietly dissatisfied. He has no real power in his life. Then he's diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. He's faced with leaving his family with no money and decides to cook meth to secure their future. Walter partners with former student Jesse Pinkman and gets his first real look at the danger of the drug trade. A rival dealer pulls a gun on them, and the stakes turn out to be life and death. Then after a series of near misses, Walter kills a rival dealer in self-defense, and he realizes he can't just dabble in this world anymore. He has to commit fully and start controlling it instead of reacting to it. Then Walt's brother-in-law, Hank, a DEA agent, gets close to the truth. A deal goes wrong, leaving Walter and Jesse cornered with no product, no money, and enemies closing in. Walter realizes the real threat isn't rival dealers, it's his own exposure and the people he trusts. He decides to stop being cautious and start using his intelligence to outmaneuver everyone, not just survive. Walter emerges with money, product, and a functioning operation, but the person he was is already gone. And the season closes out with him taking over the identity of Heisenberg. But the last one on this list is the most specific. In Mr. Beast, Eric, and thousands of other creators are silently using it in the background of their videos to keep viewers retained. And I first learned about it after paying Logan Paul's editor, Hayden Hillier-Smith, $3,000 for a consulting call, which I will give to you completely for free. It's called Save the Cat. Save the Cat is really the 3-act story structure with every single beat pre-labeled and fill in the blank, which makes it the most plug and play for any creator trying to tell a good story. Now, you should use this over the 3-act structure when you want to make sure you're hitting on all the right points that make a good story. So if you're brand new to storytelling, this is 100% the one I would recommend. It comes down to 15 fill in the blank points. Opening image, setup, theme stated, catalyst, debate, break into 2, B-story, fun and games, midpoint, bad guy closes in, all is lost, dark night of the soul, break into 3, finale, and final image. Now, this is a lot, so let me explain it with some of the most famous movies of all time. The opening image is simply a snapshot of the hero's world before the story starts. This sets the tone and establishes the before state. So for example, in the Hunger Games, Katniss's poverty-stricken life in District 12, where she cares for her sick mother and her baby sister. Then we have theme stated. This is when someone states, often the hero who ignores it, the lesson the hero is going to learn by the end. So in Finding Nemo, Marlin loses his wife, and in the opening scene establishes that theme of loss. Then we have the setup. This is the hero's world, supporting cast, and stakes are established before something bad happens. So for example, in Toy Story, the first 10 minutes introducing Andy's toys, the rules of the world, and Woody as a leader. Then the catalyst, and this is the inciting incident that knocks the hero's world off balance. So in Harry Potter, Hagrid tells Harry he's a wizard. Then the debate, where the hero hesitates. This makes them question whether to take on the journey ahead. We can see this in The Matrix when Neo hesitates to take the red pill after Morpheus' recruitment. Then we break into 2. So the hero commits and leaves the old world for the new, like Star Wars, where Luke decides to join Obi-Wan after finding his aunt and uncle killed. Which brings us to the B story, where a second relationship or subplot begins. This often carries the theme. This is like Rocky with his relationship with Adrian. Then we have fun and games, where the promise of the premise plays out. We can see this in Aladdin, where he lives as Prince Ali with the genie's magic. Then we go to the midpoint, which is a false victory or a false defeat. This raises the stakes that shifts the story's direction. So for example, in Titanic, when the ship literally hits an iceberg, which shifts from romance to survival. Then the bad guys close in. We have external pressure and internal doubt that mount as the forces align against the hero. In A Star is Born, Bradley Cooper's alcoholism and jealousy starts straining the relationship as Lady Gaga's career rises. Then we move to All is Lost. So this is the hero's lowest point, and it's often marked by a close call with death. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bane breaks Batman by throwing him in the pit, which takes us into the dark night of the soul, where the hero sits with the loss before finding the resolve to continue. Then we break into 3, where now we're armed with a new insight and the hero commits to the final push. In Mad Max, the group decides to turn around and face Immortan Joe after realizing the green place doesn't exist, which leads us into the finale, where the hero applies what they've learned to resolve the conflict. So in Star Wars, Luke goes ahead and destroys the Death Star, Rocky goes the distance against Apollo Creed, and Neo starts mastering the Matrix. Then the final image, where we see a mirror of the opening image, showing how far the hero has come. So for example, in The Hunger Games, Katniss returns to District 12 as a symbol of hope. In The Lion King, Simba on Pride Rock, mirroring the opening cub scene. So I hope that you can see how many great movies fit into these story structures, because social media has really only been out for the last 20 years, while films have been out closer to 100 years. So we can take so much from the most beautiful stories in the world and then use those rules from traditional film to make our content better. This is exactly why Mr. Beast mainly hires people from traditional media, which is how he's been able to become the largest creator in history, because he separates himself from everyone else. He's able to stand out because he understands the key storytelling principles behind world-class content. Now, I know that was a lot, so go ahead and take a minute, grab a coffee, take out a notepad, because there are 2 more key storytelling concepts that all great stories incorporate, and without them, your viewers are going to leave your videos confused and uneducated. But once you master them, it's going to allow you to tell stories in a way that can get people to easily follow along, which means that your videos are going to get more views because YouTube sees that your viewers are sticking all the way through. And the first is a concept called linear progression, which I first learned from Johnny Harris, who is one of the best storytellers on YouTube. Now, linear progression is simply the idea that you want to make each point in your video happen in strict chronological order. You don't want to go off on tangents, talk about the past, or start jumping around to random things. You want to give the audience the step-by-step. So for example, if I say I went to the park, got out of my car, and took the first few steps onto the grass, but then all of a sudden I saw a bird on the ground with a damaged wing. So I went to pick him up, put him in my bag, and got back in the car. We drove to the hospital and I dropped him off. I had no idea whether or not he would actually survive, but 5 months later I got a call from the vet telling me he was going to be okay. In this story, the events unfold in perfect chronological order. But now let's look at this version of it. I got a call from the vet that the bird I found at the park the other day was healthy. I drove him to the hospital to drop him off, and I did that because I went to the park earlier. The second one doesn't really make as much sense, and it's much easier to get lost in it. And this is because humans naturally process cause and effect. So when you make them think about the timeline of your story and place each of the pieces together, it takes them out of enjoying the story and puts them into more of a math problem, which makes it so whatever point you were trying to make gets lost. So to fix this, you need to keep your points in order. If you're making a video about how to make matcha, don't start at step 3. Introduce what you are going to do in the video, then take them through steps 1 through 5. Now, if you follow the story structures, they typically do this for you, but it's one of the key principles to keep in mind when you are scripting out your videos. It's kind of like a river with stepping stones across it. If there's one stone missing, your viewer is going to fall into the river and get swept away. So if you miss one point that the viewer needs to understand, or you just go simply too fast, then the viewer will get confused and drop off of the video. But how do you actually help your viewers understand these concepts better? Well, it all comes down to visual storytelling. So 70% of people are visual learners, meaning that just talking alone in your videos is not enough. You need to show what you are talking about. And whenever I'm reviewing edits or planning my videos, I'm ruthless about show, don't tell. Visual storytelling is essentially storytelling that helps the viewer learn, feel, or understand with the use of images. These can include what shots you show, the colors you use, the camera movement, or how many cuts you do per 5 seconds in your video. So for example, if you film a video looking slightly up at a person, it shows them as more powerful, confident, but if you film at a downwards angle, it shows them as more powerless. If you film a second angle shot with more room between the person's face and the end of the screen, it makes the speaker seem more knowledgeable, where if you film it with the speaker's face closer to the end of the screen, it makes them seem like they don't know what they're talking about. And more vibrant colors indicate happiness and fulfillment, while grays indicate monotony and depression. And this is so important to learn because viewers process images faster than text or speech. So visuals communicate exactly what you're trying to say before you ever speak a word. And it also just keeps your audience retention high, because the more things you can show, the more the audience will keep watching. And if you can master this, you are going to get more views. Every line that you write for your next video, think, how can I show this? Here's some practical examples you can actually use. Use B-roll content to help build the narrative. Each shot should simply reinforce what's being said and not just be there to fill dead space. Then you can use visual contrast. So so lighting, color grading, pacing, to mark shifts between your segments. Then show the stakes. If you're talking about a result, cut to the actual footage or graphic instead of only describing it. Then you want to keep a consistent visual style. Next, you want to make sure that your pacing is on point. So faster cuts during high tension moments, and then slower cuts once you have a point that you want to let breathe more. And if you make educational videos, this one is even more important. If you say that you've done something, show it. These lines hit way different. I took a brand new channel to 100,000 subscribers in 6 months. I took a brand new channel to 100,000 subscribers in 6 months. It's really not complicated. You just have to remember to show instead of tell. For example, if you're saying that you have a way to get an 8% click-through rate on your in-screen videos like this one right here, then show it. And if you want to see how to get it that high, then go ahead and watch this one next where I show you exactly how it works. Thanks and have a good day.